Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show David Kuenzi, who actually, in many ways, I find is just like me. He is a certified financial planner. He started his own financial planning company called Thun Financial Advisors, and he specializes in people who are cross-border investing, meaning clients he works with are people who live outside of the United States, but they have U.S. investment accounts. David, tell me something. The types of people you talk to, do they also have accounts outside the United States?
Yes, Doug, in general, they do. And by the way, it's very good to be on your program. Thank you very much for inviting us. Yeah, most of our clients reside outside the United States, and almost all of them will have a majority of their assets held in accounts in the United States. Most of them are Americans, but any American who's lived abroad for some significant period of time will have acquired some assets, including financial assets outside the United States. Pension accounts, for example, obviously bank accounts, not to mention if they have businesses or real estate holdings outside the United States.
Okay, so maybe help me out with this, because one of the topics that I always like to remind people about is the FBAR. And maybe you have another way of telling people, because all too often I'll tell people, well, did you file an FBAR? And they go, oh, I don't think I really need to. What do you say when people tell you that?
Well, we oftentimes go into a long story about the history of the FBAR, and the FBAR was very widely ignored for a very long time. It's a very old law. It goes back to 1973, I think. But before FATCA, you could generally ignore it and get away with it. In the age of FATCA, which was passed in 2010 and is now becoming implemented very widely in terms of the IRS being able to use the information to track down holders of foreign assets who are U.S. citizens, you really have to take it very, very seriously now. You have to assume that the IRS has transparency on your international accounts. So it's really a big mistake to ignore or not take seriously the FBAR report, formerly called the T90, now called the FinCEN 114. And the other thing I'd like to point out is it's really not that hard of a document to fill out and complete. It doesn't create a tax. It's only a disclosure of foreign financial assets. And so it doesn't really have to be a huge burden for most people.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to the side of investing. When people live outside the United States, and let's talk about for a minute Americans who live outside the United States, what would you say are some of the real concerns they have as far as managing their portfolio in the U.S.?
Well, there's all kinds of hot button issues now that come up for Americans abroad. First of all, a lot of people are aware of FATCA as a general concept of heightened compliance across borders. And this has led to a whole new emphasis that Americans abroad are aware of in terms of tax and compliance. So people now, where they weren't, say, 15, 20 years ago, are much more aware that even though they've been outside the United States for a long time, they have to continue filing and paying taxes in the U.S. because we have uniquely in the world citizenship-based taxation. So people are now taking that much more seriously because in the age of FATCA, again, the IRS has a lot more transparency than they did before. They have to start taking concern with not just FATCA, but all the things that previously they ignored. FBARs, for example, reporting of so-called passive foreign investment companies, which is probably the single biggest mistake that we see Americans abroad making. So passive foreign investment companies are just foreign mutual funds, and they're very complex to report on a U.S. tax return, and they're taxed very punitively. So that's a very common mistake. Now, the other thing that comes up overwhelmingly is the issue of getting your accounts opened, because the implications of FATCA really hit hardest at institutions outside the United States and in the United States that have cross-border accounts, where someone is living in one country but the account is in the other country. This is really heightened compliance about all kinds of things with respect to money laundering and securities laws and so forth. So Americans are in a vice. They're finding that foreign financial institutions don't want their investment accounts because they're worried about reporting from the point of view of FATCA compliance. And the American side now increasingly does not want to have Americans abroad hold their investment accounts because they're worried that the dual reporting implicit in FATCA and other regulatory regimes is going to raise the issue of whether or not they're violating securities laws in the other country.
Yeah, that's a real issue that we've seen. Yeah,
Yes.
We've actually gotten many people who come to us because they get what we refer to as the Dear John letter from their brokerage firm. It says, Dear John, thank you very much for being a client of ours for 20 years, but now you have 60 days to get out because you have a foreign address. We're talking with David Kuenzi, who is from Thun Financial Advisors. He's based in Madison, Wisconsin, but David is a certified financial planner like I am, and he specializes in cross-border clients just like I do. So it's really an honor for me to get to talk to David about some of the issues that both he and I see and sort of to share some of the solutions. So I'm glad that everyone's able to tune in, get the pun, Thun Financial Advisors, to tune in and listen to the conversation. David, one of the issues that a lot of times people talk to me about is they say, well, listen, I live in Israel. Why shouldn't I put all of my money in Israel in shekels? Because this is the currency that I live in. I assume you hear that from people around the world. What do you think?
Yes, the currency issue comes up whether it's Israel or Europe or Asia. And, this is a big topic. It's very non-intuitive to people. But what I say is, with respect to your investments, your long-term investments, don't think about it in terms of currency. When we buy stocks and bonds and real estate investment trusts and other types of investments we want to hold for our clients, these are not currencies. Currency is cash, as I always say. Cash you should hold in a bank account. We all need some cash on hand, right? And if you're in Israel, you should hold a significant amount of cash on hand in shekels because you need it to pay your expenses upcoming. But your long-term investments, you're going to hold in stocks primarily, bonds, real estate investment trusts, and those assets don't have a direct currency denomination. So just because you're holding those through a U.S. account and just because your U.S. brokerage firm reports its value of assets in dollars at the end of the day, that doesn't make that a dollar investment.
Let's clarify that a little more. Let's say a person comes in and he buys a 3-year bond or a 5-year bond, a corporate bond in the U.S. He puts in his $100,000, buys a bond portfolio. And in the meantime, the dollar goes down against the shekel. Mm-hmm. So 3 years later, he's actually got less money for spending in Israel. Now, you could say he's got the same amount of money in dollars. I like your statement that currency is cash, but it seems to be that the investments are also based in the currency, no?
Well, that's true. I mean, we will build, what you pointed out here is the issue of bonds. And bonds do have a currency denomination, unlike stocks, right? So when we're talking about bonds, the generalization that I made before is less accurate. And it is true then for clients of ours, when we invest in bonds, and we will always invest some portion of a client's portfolio in bonds, we do want to make sure that all of the bonds we hold are not purely U.S. dollar denominated bonds. And so for our clients abroad, we will oftentimes buy non-U.S. issue bonds that are issued in euros or in yen or in Swiss franc. I don't think we've ever bought one that's denominated in shekels, but I'm sure it's possible.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a very large bond market here as well. But I find one of the things that's important that I tell clients on this question is, at the end of the day, it's important that you understand the investments that you're getting involved in. And even though people may have been living in Israel for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years or more, and even though they understand the language, understanding the financial system here is just different from what they're used to in America. And they're allowed to keep U.S. investment portfolios. So unless they're really going to become an expert in whatever's going on in the Israeli markets, I think it's a real risk to bring your money to a place where you just don't understand the markets. And I'm presuming some of the other countries that you deal with are as complicated, if not more, than the Israeli markets.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. And I think that's excellent advice. And what I always say is the U.S. markets have the biggest pools of liquidity, the lowest fees, the least amount, the widest array of investment opportunities. And it's easier through a U.S. account to build a globally diversified portfolio of liquid financial assets that have all kinds of underlying currency exposures, including Israeli stocks and European stocks, than you can anywhere in the world. So while you're in Israel, sure, you want to have some exposure to the economy and the currency of the country in which you live. You're still going to have the majority of your assets diversified out across U.S. stocks and European stocks and emerging markets. And all of those asset classes are going to be much more easily integrated into your portfolio using U.S. accounts. So that generally is the kind of direction we guide people towards.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. Hey, David, I see we're just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, tell me, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Well, we publish a tremendous amount of very helpful information for people on our website. Our website is www.thun, that's Thun, sounds like fun, but it's Thun, Thun, financial.com. And there we make public a lot of the very high quality research that our team produces here on all kinds of cross-border financial planning and investing issues. So start there to learn more about our firm.
Okay, we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. David Kuenzi, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having us, Doug. It's really been a great opportunity.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.